I'm just thinking about the brain and brain function again. I guess because a lot of my thinking and some of these videos, I find myself talking about the mind and thought and I guess psychology. But I do like to keep coming back to the material substance of the brain, because given that mind is supervenient on the brain, I think it's really useful to touch down on, just touch down on what I know of the actualities of the stuff itself, really, occasionally. And what I'm thinking about now is to do with how I think about the brain and how pictures I see of the brain, not so much things like fMRI scans, but how the brain is represented diagrammatically. If you see pictures of brain function, what they tend to look like. And the pictures that I see of the brain, when I've looked at textbooks or when I've been online to look at bits and pieces, they tend to focus on the cells, the neurons, and they tend to focus on the synapses that connect the various bits together. And the synapses look a little bit like switches, of course, and the cells look a little bit like parts of a circuit diagram. And I certainly come away with that, with the experience that I'm looking at a kind of wiring diagram, a kind of electrical circuit. And I think that carries with it, unless I'm really monitoring my own understanding. What I tend to come away with is this sense that the brain, as I say, it looks a little bit like a wiring diagram. It also functions a little bit like one. I get the sense that the thinking is a bit like a kind of single pulse moving down this, just through this network, or it's or a thought kind of is like a particular pathway that's established through this immense network, and then the activation floods through that pathway. Now, I haven't been told that. That's just what seems to emerge for me out of the images. But that's completely wrong, I'm sure of it, because that's not how the brain works. And that's certainly things like fMRI scans, and I guess just a moment's personal reflection indicate that that can't be how it works, because thoughts are much more chaotic and they're much more distributed, and they're happening, and an activation patterns in the brain isn't like one of those balls you get in pinball machines just ricocheting around, and it's not like a child running through a maze or something like that. It's much more kind of global. It happens in lots and lots of places simultaneously. So the kind of images that I'm trying to think about in terms of imagining brain function, and I am, of course, in my imagination constrained by the kinds of bodily experiences that myself and my ancestors have had. So I can't really imagine brain function in its totality, but the kind of images I can pull up are things like, I'm kind of imagining floods moving through, this is a pretty grim image actually, but floods moving through cities. When you get these kind of images in science fiction films or dystopian films of global warming, you often get these images of floodwaters rising and sweeping through city streets. And that's one of the images I have for thought patterns moving through the brain. Not destructive, not carrying any of the negative connotations of that, but just of this kind of surge of force, of impulse, moving through a network, if you like, a network of streets in that case. And perhaps most of the force of that surge is channeled down particular city streets, but there will be tributaries going off down side streets. There will be floodwater going over the sides and in shop doorways, and lots of smaller actions and behaviours going on with this surge. So I'm kind of imagining thoughts as a bit like that. And also, of course, as the water surges through the city streets, it's also changing the nature of those streets as it moves. it's rounding off corners, it's carving paths for itself, and setting up kind of habits, if you like, future surges. So that's one of the images that I have. The other image is a flock of birds flying through a forest. And I'm borrowing from William James here when he talks about thought as being a series of flights and perchings, he says. And I'm kind of imagining that, but rather than this being a single bird representing a single conscious thought, I'm imagining this flock of birds flying through a forest. And each individual bird will be doing its flights and perchings, and each individual bird will be taking its route around a particular tree branch or settling on a slightly different branch. But the flock as a whole will be making sort of general movements and making general directions. And there will be outlying birds which are moving in paths and in parts of the forest which are relatively different to those at the centre of that path. So again, there's this sense of a kind of large, amorphous mass of thought process moving through a network of possible movement with no single centre and no single identity to it, but all of it held together by a rough kind of heuristic, the rules of flocking behaviour in that case, and the overall activity being determined, as I say, not individually. Oops. Hey wee guy, come on, let's go this way. Alsatian coming, my dogs don't like Alsatians. Come on, Steve, come on, guy. So again, you got that thing. And the third is to do with swarms, which I've talked about before, which is very similar, I guess. Swarming behaviour, whether it be swarms of locusts, making their moves across the ground and in the air, or swarms of bees, or swarms of ants. Again, moving through a network, having some kinds of relationship between one another, although at a very simple level, affecting the network as they move through it, either by chewing it up, dropping seeds as they fly, affecting the next passage, or washing through those things. I'm not really sure where I'm going with that, but those are the kind of images that I'm trying to remind myself of when I look at pictures of the brain or I think about the brain, to feel more intuitively interesting, I suppose, than the bagatelle model or the child running through a labyrinth model.